If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniac. I was DJing at a wedding in a little village about 100 kilometers from my city. I packed up everything once things were going down and was the last one out of there at 3 AM. I start to drive down the highway and see a big orange glow emanating from the other side of a ridge on the other side of railway tracks. I decide to check it out as it was even and smooth. I've never seen a light like it before. Was thinking it might be some huge bonfire for the wedding's after party. I had to drive up 1 or 2 kilometers to cross the tracks and the crest for the ridge, and once I did, the light was still off on the horizon. I drove towards it for a few kilometers, but it didn't seem to be getting any nearer. I decided it wasn't a bonfire, and that I didn't want to get myself into trouble, so I turned around, heading back to the city. 50 kilometers later, I get to the main highway, so I decide to look back, and the light was just as big in the sky as it had been in the village. I looked back at the news the next day and found out what happened. A few underground gas station storage tanks had ruptured and combusted, which causes an absolutely massive fire, and there's no option but to let it burn out. It ended up burning for days.
This happened last Friday, and I'm still stumped. For reference, I am a male in my late 20s, and I live with my girlfriend, who is currently away on business. I work for a large financial institution in the UK, and often work till very late, as I hate bringing home work. For some background info, we bought our current house a few weeks ago, and during the moving process, I was away with work, leaving it down to my partner and a few friends. My car has also recently had a complete electronics failure, so we were down to just using her car. The house itself is located in a small gated community off a country road on the outskirts of an upmarket town in the UK. It's surrounded by woodlands, and if you didn't live there or know someone who does, chances are you wouldn't have heard of it or even knew it existed. In total, there are 8 houses in the community, and the main gate gives access to the first 6, where my house is located, and then there's houses in the community. In total, there are 8 houses in the community, and the main gate gives access to the first 6, where my house is located, and then there's a further 2 gates on the top of the road, which lead to 2 very large mansion-style houses. The houses which haven't got individual gates are about 100 feet away from each other and have an enclosed rear garden, and the neighbours are all business types, who are very often in work and keep themselves to themselves. Anyway, about 2 days after leaving for my business trip, I get a call from my girlfriend who seems shaken and tells me that there's a man standing in the garden, and that she can't see his face but he's walking around and crouching in the tree line. So concerned, but not 100% convinced, as she does have a vivid imagination, and it's the first time she's been home alone in our new house, I tell her to lock the doors, go to bed, and call the police if she sees him again. I return to our city's train station on Tuesday, and agree with my girlfriend that she'll pick me up in her car. Then I'll take it home as she schedules to go to Manchester for a conference. I meet up with her, grab a coffee, see her off to her train, then drive her car back to our house. The time is roughly 9 PM. I park the car in the driveway, head inside, shower, watch some reruns of King of the Hill, then head to bed. Then get woken up by a light shone into the bedroom window from downstairs. I get up to investigate, crouching to avoid being seen, and head into the study next to our bedroom and open the curtains to cover some French doors that lead to the small balcony. My heart drops when I see the man has now moved towards our back door and is trying the door handle. The house is in an L shape, so although I can't see him, he can't see me without moving around from the back door. He stops for a while, begins flashing the light on and off back into the woods, before walking calmly back into them. I call the police and make a report. Nothing happens on Wednesday, but on Thursday, when I'm giving our cat a bath, she just thinks she needs them. I hear the garage door being messed with. I'm in the bathroom directly behind the garage, so I move into the kitchen to get a knife before heading to the garage to check what's going on. When the noises stop, and I hear running down the driveway and away from the house. I call the police and they send an officer around to check the property. All they find is some knife marks and scuffs on the bottom of the garage. On Friday, I get my car delivered from the dealership and decide to work from home. I also park my car in the garage, leave my girlfriend on the drive. At around 11 PM, I'm in the upstairs study, listening to music and working, when I find myself freezing. I thought I was going to stop breathing as I felt someone watching me, and turning to face the French doors, I see a man, nondescript looking, around 35, wearing a coat and gloves, carrying what looked like a torch, standing on my balcony. Our eyes met. Now filled with rage, I go for one of my golf clubs from my golf bag and charge towards the door. He climbs down off the balcony and runs into the woods. I've never seen this man in my life before, but I am sure it's a man that's been causing problems in my life recently. It's also dawned on me that he would have only seen my girlfriend before, and only seen her car. Maybe he thought she lived alone. I've notified the police and I brought some more security devices to install on the property as well, and I've also parked my car on the drive of hers. We don't know who he is or why he's doing this, but we're hoping it won't happen again. This took place a couple of years ago when I was still dating my ex. Him and his dad had adopted a Rottweiler German Shepherd mix from a shelter. The dog was really aggressive towards strangers and other animals. It took a couple of months for him to warm up to me, but eventually we bonded and I would occasionally be cuddled up on the couch with him and take a nap. It got to the point where he would push people aside so all 88 pounds of him could be with me on the couch instead of someone else sitting next to me. During the summer, my ex and me were house sitting for his dad who was on vacation with his girlfriend. My ex would usually be home to walk the dog. He was way too strong for me, but this time he was at work and I had to walk the dog. We had ordered a special harness for him beforehand, hoping it would make him pull less. My ex and his dad didn't live in the safest of neighbourhoods, and it was getting dark out while I went into the woods to go on our walk. I let the dog run around by himself, but kept his harness on. Since he was a very aggressive dog towards other people and other dogs, I'd like to keep it on so I could call him as soon as I saw someone else and get him on his leash again. For this reason, I was kind of on edge and looking around me all the time. We weren't walking for too long when I saw a group of guys coming up in front of me. They had their hoods on and kept their heads low while clearly whispering to each other and nodded their heads towards me. I looked behind me and another group of guys was approaching me from that side. I realised it was dark out. I was a 16-year-old girl walking by myself in the woods. The dog was running off somewhere and couldn't be seen in the dark, but I had his leash in my pocket. The guys hadn't noticed I had him with me. I quickly called him to my side, and I heard his paws loudly coming towards me while he was growling. He pushed himself against my leg and loudly started growling at the guys. I told him just to keep walking or I'd command the dog to attack. Believe me, this wasn't a small dog and he growled like a bear. Luckily the guys quickly walked in another direction and I took the fastest route home again. It took me a while of cuddling on the couch to get calm again, but I'm so grateful the dog listened as well. He was very protective of me and he noticed me being scared. My ex and me broke up years ago and I have no idea if my saviour dog is doing well, but thanks for protecting me that day. I don't know what could have happened if you weren't there.
I was up in the middle of nowhere, on some mountains in rural Ireland, and I come across hundreds and hundreds of bones from different animals. It doesn't make sense why it's up so high. It is obviously normal to see a skeleton in the wilderness, but this huge pile of bones is odd. Some were from sheep, others from cats and dogs, and some really look like they're from humans. It's weird because we don't have any predatory animals in Ireland. The only thing that could have gathered it would have been a person.
Forgive me if the way I write about this seems light-hearted. I'd like to say it's a way that I cope with it, and it's just the kind of person I am. Also forgive me if this is really long. Now, I'd like to start off this day by saying that most consider me an intimidating person by nature. My close friends don't really believe that, but they know that I most definitely do not mess around when it comes to certain situations, whether it's telling someone to go away, as much as I hate to admit it, getting physical with someone. I've never really had someone approach me in public thinking of getting the best of me, if that makes sense. About half a year ago, I was at my then house rolling some small joints with my girlfriend. I live somewhat in the middle of nowhere, and there are a lot of trees in my area, and they're also in my backyard. I wouldn't classify it a massive forest, but it's not small enough to simply be a grove. There's wildlife there though. My girlfriend and I hadn't smoked much that day, and we were home alone, and seeing as we could do anything we wanted, we decided, yeah, let's smoke while taking a bit of a nature walk. It seemed like an amazing idea at the time. My girlfriend sat next to me while I rolled it up. We were talking about random stuff and listening to heavy metal as I focused on rolling those sweet spliffs. Can I mention, those joints were absolute pells. Anyway, I had finished rolling and we decided to finally leave my house and walk into the plain woods, which at the time had never been intimidating to me or anyone I'd been in there with, unless they were just really scared by nature or had some anxiety issues. I have the joints in my back pocket and we leave. We're walking through my backyard towards one of many trails from my place. I should also mention it was summer, so it was only 7 PM and it wouldn't be getting dark for maybe 2, 3 or 4 hours. We light up for about an hour or so, it's fine. We just talk and kiss a little bit. Basic stuff really. We're on the second joint, just walking along the path, and we see this massive flat rock, like a pancake boulder. We're like, hell yeah, and we sit on it and lay down. The two of us just sit there for a while, holding hands, and passing the joint between us. Maybe 30 minutes pass, and we start hearing noises. I'd like to mention by this point, the sun will start to set soon, maybe another 30 minutes. We're obviously really freaked out by the sounds. At the time, we just looked at each other, and internally blamed it on the weed making us a little paranoid. There was wildlife in this forest, as I mentioned. We were trespassing in their backyard, so why would we mind a cute bunny? After a while of silence, we hear that noise we both know damn well isn't an animal. Now that I think about it, it sounded like someone running something sharp against a solid but jagged surface, like a rock. It was pretty far away, but somehow it was loud enough that we heard it. It was faint though. We look at each other and immediately sit up. We don't see anything. I stand up and urge her to do so as well. This most definitely wasn't the forest fairies. We stand up for a minute or so, and then we hear a big snap, like a tree branch getting stepped on with a ton of force, and then fast footsteps, like some dude is sprinting. I freak out and go into panic mode, as I'm worried to admit. And of course, we were deep into these woods, and I urge my girlfriend to run as fast as she can towards my house. Now, Kimber and I aren't necessarily sporty people. We were more of the academic bunch our whole lives. We weren't completely out of shape, but looking back on it, it would have been a hell of a lot easier if we did cross country or something. Kimber runs in front of me, and is a little farther ahead. We are on trails at this point, and the twigs and leaves are completely shredding our faces, neck, legs and arms. We hear this person who is running, obviously running after us, start hooting and hollering, like some damn creep or something. This makes us really scared, and obviously we run faster. We're sprinting, huffing and puffing like a fat kid. This person is unfortunately closer at this point, and I look back and I see him. He's an older guy, maybe 40 years old, give or take. His hair is long and really thin, and he's scraggly looking. This makes me pure cement, of course. I yell at Kimber to hurry up and she does. I look behind me again, and he's somehow gaining on us. Kimber makes a turn, and I recognise it being the straight to my house. The turn was abrupt, and I thank Jesus because this guy must have been too close to process a turn. We turn and see the lights of my house in the darkness. Seeing this beacon of hope makes us run harder. The guy can't be seen, and we make it into my cleared backyard. My girlfriend runs up my back porch, steps and rips the sliding door open, letting me in and locking it. She slams the blinds down to cover the door, and we make sure all the doors and windows are locked. I feel my back pocket for my phone, and realise of course it's in those trees. My girlfriend's phone is dead. No house phone because who has one of those these days? It was a burden at the time though. my girlfriend starts having a panic attack and anxiety attack. I'm not sure which one of those it was. I plug her phone in and it starts charging. I turn all the lights off except for those by our doors. I saw no sign of the man for the rest of that night, and for the rest of the time I lived there. Her phone charged and we called the cops, and they surveyed the area, but found nothing. It was terrifying for me, and I can only assume it was worse for my girlfriend who has anxiety. I don't know what the man wanted that day, but it can't have been good.
A few years ago, my friend and I were staying in a hotel at a horse show we were competing in. We're probably 16 at the time, so her mum was staying with us too. I remembered it being a sketchy hotel. We even brought some sleeping bags and our own pillows because it wasn't clean. One night, my friend Megan and I went to the hot tub without her mum to unwind after a long day. When we got there, there's a man sitting in a chair by the pool, fully clothed. I didn't pay much attention to him, but it only occurred to me later how weird it was that there's a guy there with all his clothes on, when my friend and I are the only other people there. Almost immediately after Megan and I got there, he got up and left. Megan and I got in, and maybe 10 minutes later, these girls that look a little older than us come in. Megan and I don't think much of it, talking about our day, until one of the girls catches us and realizes that we're talking about a horse show and says something like, "Cool, so you're staying at this hotel?" We said yes, that we're staying here for a 3-day event, and we just make small talk. At this point, Megan mentioned that we're there with her mum. There was nothing weird about what the girls said. It was just weird that they're talking to us since they were obviously older and we don't know them. Eventually though, they invited us back to their hotel room. Megan and I are understandably apprehensive and said we had to get up early to need bed. The girls were persistent, saying we could come and hang out and they're looking for some new friends, which seemed weird since, like I said, we're in a hotel in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. Not exactly the place you take a vacation with your friend to meet new people. They even said we could stay over with them, so we wouldn't have to go back to sleep with Megan's mum. Megan and I were insisting that we had a long day and we wanted to go and sleep, not hang out. But eventually we got up and left because they wouldn't stop talking about it. At the time, Megan and I decided not to tell her mum because we realised it's a weird situation and didn't want her mum to ban us from going to the hot tub alone. It wasn't until years later we realised that it could have been human trafficking because the man that was in the room alerted the girls of our presence to come back after us. It still makes my skin crawl.
Okay, so this happened last night, so I'm still pretty freaked out. To preface this, the other night I got followed as well, but only for about a block, and later ended up talking to those guys, and they were just messing with us, and ended up being super sweet. But there's another story for another subreddit, which helps to explain my mentality throughout the beginning of this whole experience. Also, the town I live in is usually regarded as one of the safest in the state, so I was being really naive, partly because of that fact. So, last night, two of my friends, a guy in the front seat and a girl in the back seat, and I, a girl, were driving around after seeing a movie and eating dinner. I was driving a family member's car because it was dark and one of my headlights was out. The car I usually drive brakes and turns like an old piece of crap, whereas this car, a newer, better model, brakes and turns like butter. It's so smooth. My friends and I get into a conversation about this and really wanted to test it out. We were right near my town's high school, so I pulled into a massive parking lot in the back, where I thought I could drive around and do some quick turns and stops without wrecking into anything. I pretty much thought we were alone, because in my mind, who hangs out at a high school at 9:30 on a Sunday night? So I went in, did maybe 3 laps, and after about 5 minutes we left. No harm done. After we left, we noticed a car come out of the parking lot after us. I didn't see where they came from, but maybe they were just leaving too. So I kept driving without really thinking about it, but after a couple of turns and about 10 minutes, these guys were still behind us. So I kept driving for a while, trying really hard to get them off my ass. But they kept so close that even when I did use my signal, they could tell exactly what I was going to do before I even did it. I didn't want to call the police, because it hadn't been a complete wait period after getting my license yet, so I wasn't supposed to be driving any of my friends around, and I really didn't want to lose my license. At that point, I was still somewhat confident they were just messing with us, like the guys the night before, so I pulled into another, pretty empty parking lot, bad mistake, and waiting to see if they were going to get out. They pulled in like 25 feet away from me, in T-bone position, turned on their brights, and about 4 high school age guys got out. I made sure to keep my car in drive with a foot on the brake, just in case we needed to haul us out. Finally, one of them walked up and started knocking at my window and yelling, "Roll it down!" So instead of doing the smart thing of letting them get out of the car and then getting the hell out of there, I cracked my window. Learn how to effing drive. It's assholes like you that get the cops called on the high school parking lot all the time. The guy who was aggressively knocking at the window shouted. "Okay, sorry," was all I could reply, trying to keep my tone. The guy who just talked to me stepped back a little, still shouting, but I was honestly too flustered to remember what, and one of his friends came a bit closer and yelled, "And you guys were effing frying stuff at our car." "God no, absolutely not, we would never," I explained, still trying to not sound upset or scared. Finally, all 4 guys backed up a little, and one from the back, who hadn't spoken yet, said, "Well, okay, but come back and we'll beat him up. He looks like a pussy anyway," looking at my friend. Then, after some silence and hesitation, they got back in the car and left. My friend and I just sat there for, I don't know how long, in just silence, until my friend in the back seat broke said silence, her voice shaking a little, with a sentence that perfectly summed up that entire encounter. What the hell? And with that, I took my foot off the brake and left the scene of what had just gone down. So, I don't want to see those aggressive parking lot boys again.
My boyfriend John and I went to hang out with his best friend called Mike and his current girlfriend. She knew about a party that's going on with some of her childhood friends who just finished their high school. So we arrived to the middle of nowhere. We see a bunch of people hanging out in front of yards of a few homes, drinking beer and just hanging out. It was very strange to me. We felt out of place. People were whispering about us and pointing at us. I assume because it's a small town where everyone knows each other, so the boys start mocking my boyfriend's shirt, a Lacoste polo, saying he's rich. Now my boyfriend was not rich, got a lot of hand-downs from his boss after he gained a few pounds, but we laugh it off. After a little bit, we just standing around, and someone decided that we're going to a friend's house who had a pool. We all follow, thinking someone's actual home might be less strange than hanging out in front of random people's yards. Now we eventually arrive there, and there's some girls in the pool who are fully clothed. They seem nice enough. Some people are hanging outside of the driveway. I have a prosthetic leg, so I get tired if I stand up for too long. I sit on the back of the truck. After a while, a dude approaches us and sits down next to me. I was pretty naive at the time. Now I grew up in a small town from a different state. The dude started telling us how he's from New York, questioning my life. Then he tries to touch me, saying I was cute or something. My boyfriend was there, so I felt safe enough not to react. I shrug off his comments and laugh at it, trying to act uninterested but frozen in fear. I had no idea where John's friend Mike was, much less his girlfriend who actually might know these people. John is watching, waiting for me to say something, which I don't. I don't know why. I don't like the attention. The dude was not attractive, didn't seem fun or cool, just obviously a drunk creep. He starts getting more weird and I say, "Go away, I'm not interested, I have a boyfriend." He said, "Oh well, that's okay." He doesn't seem to mind, getting more strange. Then my boyfriend tells him to get off her. The guy says sorry and goes off to the woods. It's in front of the home. They eventually begin fighting. Now it was the homeowner. He had been passed out in his truck for the past 4 hours, but come in to see a complete stranger choking his friend. 3 guys run up on him. He managed to fight off 2 of them, but the host of the party has him in a headlock. He held him until he's almost unconscious. They fell to the ground with the host on top of him pressing down on his throat, cutting off his ability to breathe. I try and whack him off but can't do anything. I look up and I can see that he's trying to kill my boyfriend. I then dig my prosthetic knee into his back. John's friends were nowhere to be seen. The party host had finally let off him, and we run to our car. Mike and his girlfriend are close behind, obviously aware of what's happening. We decide to call the cops. Now this is in a place called Rockdale Country, a backwards nasty country town. I didn't realise how horrible it was until we're inside the sheriff's office. They claimed that the reports had gone missing, and nothing ever come of it.
I have this weird compulsion. Whenever I see a door, a window, or virtually any surface that I believe someone could hide behind, I imagine a face peering out at me, staring. I imagine what I could do. What could I do? You will soon find out why I have this phobia. Onto the story. I will try my best to remember all the details, but my mind has repressed a lot of it. Around June of 2016, my mother and I were living in a small apartment. There was no basement or attic obviously, but there was one tiny crawl space in the closet floor of my bedroom. I never looked in it. I suppose some people would be overwhelmed with curiosity, but my mind had already imagined all the worst scenarios. I decided to leave whatever dead bodies and ghosts were down there for whoever rented after us. It was a nice apartment, small but perfect for the 2 of us. We lived there for a few peaceful months until the noises started. It was nothing extreme, just the odd bump in the night, and particularly scratching. My mum just brushed it off as rats in the walls, and as long as they stayed in there, I saw no reason to get rid of them. A week or 2 later, I had already grown used to the noise. It became almost comforting in a way. After all, I never really liked silence. That is, until I woke up one night to a different noise, a rolling sound, eerily similar to the sound my closet made when I opened it. I peeked my eyes open and looked over, but I couldn't make out anything in the dark. I thought maybe I saw something move, but I was well aware of how my mind played tricks on me in the dark. There was only one way to find out. I turned on my lamp. I feel like crying just writing this out. It's been almost a year since I've had to record this night. When I turned on the light, I expected to see the closet full of coats, but what I saw was much, much worse. It was an eye, not just an eye, but the entire half of someone's face, barely visible in the tiny crack he had opened. He didn't even react to being caught, no smile, no fear, just watching. My heart has never beat faster than that night. I wish I screamed, or maced him, or anything, but I just stared back, frozen in time until I couldn't hold it in anymore. I began sobbing, loudly. I think I tried to say something along the lines of, "What do you want?" But I was consumed in my crying. He opened the door more. I can now see his entire body, which I don't care to describe as I've spent 2 long years trying to forget that face. Shh. I lost my breath at that. Hearing him made it real. I couldn't pretend this was some weird dream or hallucination anymore. At this, I sat up and pressed my back against the wall. It's okay, Redacted. He said it so cheerfully, it gave me chills just remembering it. This is when I finally had the courage to run out of the room. This creep knew my name. My effing name. My mum, still half asleep while she called the police, thought I'd just imagined it. Of course, by the time the police got there, he was already long gone. All that was left of him was that damned crawl space. I still never looked inside, though writing this now, I kinda wish I did. Having some sort of proof of this would, I don't know, comfort me I guess. Because at least you would all know that I'm not crazy. Apparently he had been living there, for how long I don't know, but the officers who arrived first on the scene said that there were tally marks inside the crawl space. I don't know how many. I didn't want to know whether he was marking the days or weeks. I just wanted to leave that apartment, and we did. The police never found him, not for certain. They thought they found a homeless man who matched the description, but he was apparently unresponsive. I've always thought they didn't take it all that seriously. They just thought he was a squatter. Even after I told them he knew my name, they thought that given how long he had seemingly been squatting, he had probably just heard my name through the floorboards. Since that night, he's been the face I always see when there's an open door or closet. It's grown more distorted as time goes on, but I can always make out a part of his pursed lips. As if he's still shushing me, even now. It's gotten easier with time, but I don't think it will ever leave me completely. Anyway, I guess we didn't actually have rats.
When I was a teenager, I had this strange thing that I would just take night walks in areas with no lights, mostly forested paths. My logic then was facing fears would make me feel better. One night, it was pitch black. Couldn't really see far. So I was doing my thing, and I bump into someone else. I only see him at the last moment. I scream and started running back, only to hear him screaming back at me to come back, chasing me now. I can hear the sound of his footsteps. They eventually become more distant, and I did a Forrest Gump and just kept running. I never went for a night forest walk again. I know I shouldn't have been out there at that time, but the fact that there was a fully grown man there, looking to be in his 50s or 60s doing the same thing, who chased after me just does not make sense. A few years after my father had graduated from SCU and my mother had graduated from TCU, they both had jobs at a small company in Fort Worth. Having met at a few company parties, they finally got married, and my father gets a job in Colorado for a small but growing engineering company. So off they go, packing up and moving from Fort Worth to Colorado. Getting in a car with these few belongings, they start to make their way to Colorado. Now, I'm not sure where they are, but they take a road instead of a large intersected highway. My mother and father decided to take a smaller, not so travelled route on the highway on their final stretch back home to my father's hometown, to then catch Highway 14 to their new home. Having driven all day, and it being the middle of night, my dad has the idea of pulling off to the side of the road to sleep for a few hours before waking up and finishing the journey. Now there's no rest stops whatsoever, as they're on a highway in the middle of nowhere. Now my mum agreed that maybe they should stop, but after 20 minutes she wasn't able to sleep, so instead of sleeping, she said she'd drive, allowing my father to be able to rest up a bit. Just to reiterate, This is not a so travelled upon highway. There are no lights, and my parents are in the middle of nowhere from the nearest city or town. Not a mile or two down the road. My mum notices something on the side of the road. As she gets closer, she notices it's just a single man in the middle of nowhere with no lights or anything, just walking on the side of the road in the direction of where my parents are parked. There was no broken down car or anything, just this man with nothing but miles around him. My parents wanted to stop and speak to him, but they got very shook. My parents didn't bring it up much, and they've ever wondered what happened to him, or what had happened to them if they had both fallen asleep in their car at the side of the road. Something about the whole situation was just off, and why that guy was out there on his own just doesn't make sense. His intentions couldn't have been good. When I was younger, my brother and I used to go exploring the woods near our home. All of that stopped one day. I've never went to the woods since, and I have a deep fear and some PTSD of seeing pictures of myself. You'll know why. So like I said, me and my brother love exploring the woods and forest around where we live. My mum and dad don't know that we do this. Well, they do, but don't know how far into the woods we go. So on one day after school, like every other, we go for an adventure. We play tag for a little bit and end up going quite far into the forest. Now luckily, my brother knows our way back, so I'm not too worried. I've lost track of where we are. As we're going, he gets this weird feeling that we're being watched. I said to him we should probably get back soon because it's getting dark and it's probably not safe, and that our mum and dad are going to kill us if they know how far out we are. He says, yeah, I think you're right, but something feels wrong. I say, what do you mean? And he says, I don't know, I don't feel like it's safe to go back the normal way. We end up heading in a big loop to get back. As we're walking, my brother says, I think we're in private property now. There's a no trespassing sign up ahead. I think, wow, I never even realised this was territory we weren't allowed in. So we go and take a closer look to see what the sign actually says. Now at first I think my mind's playing tricks on me, because it doesn't look like a sign at all. It's a photo. Maybe it's a logo of the owners or something. My brother says no way and sprints up. He then turns white, and I've never seen him like this before. I have that feeling I'm being watched again. As I get closer, I can see why he's so scared. It's a picture of me, with the eyes X'd out in black pen. We both sprinted back. I have honestly never ran so fast in my life, and a lot of it's a blur because I think when you're so scared, your mind forces you to shut out certain memories. But I can remember as soon as we got back, we looked out the window to see if we could see anyone or anything. But there's nothing. We both agree not to tell our parents what had happened because they'd never let us out in the woods again, and even to this day, we never told them. I know how stupid this is looking back on it, but we were kids just trying to not get into trouble. Now since this day, I can't stand going into the woods more than maybe 5 or 10 feet. It's like I have flashbacks and I feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere, even if I'm next to other people or civilization. And if I look at photos quickly and they resemble myself, I start to get cold chills and my adrenaline rises so highly. About 3 months ago, my fiance and I were driving from Oregon to Arizona. We're in a part of Nevada that's in the middle of nowhere. We are on the end of a 70-mile stretch with no cell service, and it's about midnight. My wife is small, only 5'1" and 100 pounds. Now it's my wife's turn to drive at this point. I was reclined in my seat out of view sleeping. She shakes me awake and says, "This guy's been following me for a while." I glance behind and see a big truck only 10 feet behind us. I tell her to speed up, figuring he just wanted us to go faster, but he keeps the same distance from us. All of a sudden he shoots into the oncoming lane, overtakes us, then proceeds to slow in front of us, bringing his speed down to about 10. She backs off a considerable distance when he slams on his brakes and starts opening his door. At this point I sit all the way up and roll my window down. He spots me, slams his door shut and takes off. Now I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but if he didn't see me, he would have definitely tried to kidnap my wife. We're very shook up and go to report him to the police at the next gas station. My wife has never drove in the middle of nowhere alone again. I don't know what ever come of the police investigation either. This happened like 16 years ago. I was 12 then. I was in the summer camp of my Boy Scouts troop, but with boys and girls. As we're all in Spain, scouting here is actually quite a liberating thing. One of the most important activities during summer camp is what we call raid. Basically going out of camp to adventurously trek for a couple of days. My friends and I planned an amazing route through a beautiful mountain range called Pateron in the northeast of Spain. 3 days walking, 2 nights sleeping out of the camp. My raid camp consisted of 15 boys and girls between 12 and 13. We took food with us, knew how to read a map and how to build a shelter, how to search for water, and pretty much anything necessary to survive a couple of days, so no adults were camping with us. Our plans for the first day were to climb a mountain that was just under 3,000 meters high, and sleep by a glacial lake near the top. It's a long walk from our camp. I mean, it's probably about 15 miles away. So at about 6, we decide we're not going to reach the lake at the time we predicted. We find a nice place to build a shelter, did it, cook some dinner, and we're in the middle of a beautiful mountain, about 6 miles from the nearest road. Let's add another 5 kilometers more for the closest village. We can't be happier. We still had nearly 2 hours until sunset when we finished our last meal, so we thought it would be a good idea to send a smaller group to clean the dishes and refill water to a spring we had been going past while walking. Now I volunteered to go, and 3 others joined. We got a couple of light torches too, just in case, and head towards a fountain. Night came. While we're on our way back to the shelter, we can hear the rest of our group singing and having fun in the distance. Suddenly, one of my friends stopped and pointed out something by the side of our trail. This wasn't there on our way down, I'm sure, he said. There was a light reflecting pole from the road torn into pieces. We went from being happy and relaxed to mildly scared. and rush round to see where our friends are. We told them about our creepy finding that night. We were just kids, so fear escalates fast. Who could be hiding in the same mountain range we are, and why? Two of the older guys, who are around 15, think it's a good idea to take a look around and try and calm us. Although being out there without them was even scarier, we also appreciated it. They went away with a light torch and a knife and whistle each. We remained seated inside the shelter, which was nothing more than a couple of tarps held together by sticks near a big boulder. Silent and scared, I remembered hearing quite a lot of sobbing around me. I was thinking that I didn't want to die there. One of the girls suggested we could sing and try and think of something else to try and take our minds off the situation. Some disapproved because we might not hear the whistles, but did so anyway. We spent about 10 or 20 minutes doing so. Then whistling interrupts our singing. We hear it more clearly. Two whistles coming towards us at a really fast pace. I remember taking my knife from its sheath and keeping it in my hands. Luckily it's our friends. They arrived nervous and exhausted from the run. They told us they stumbled upon a long stick standing with lots of blood over it. More than what our nerves could stand. Most of us are crying, some praying. They then told us that they're gonna go back and look for whoever's in the mountain with us and confront him. In case things go bad, we'll run somewhere else so he can't find you, one of them said. We asked them to stay, but nobody's able to move a finger to actually stop them from leaving. There was no more singing, only weeping and barely audible prayers. I don't want to die there. I want to see my family. After a while, we hear some noises, followed by the voices of our friends. They came back at a calm pace with relief in their faces. It's all just a misunderstanding, one explained. It's just a park ranger. We found him. He explained to us that he was just walking around as part of his duty, said the other. The bloody stick was just from a rabbit that he hunted for dinner. It's quite a relief. We relaxed. Someone even spoke about taking out our sleeping bags and going to sleep. That sounds wonderful, but it wasn't long until one of the old guys said he's a bit suspicious. You see, he wasn't wearing a uniform, nor a badge or anything that we could use to identify him. He's not a ranger. And who walks kilometers away from the nearest road late at night to hunt rabbits? Are there even rabbits at this altitude? Terror comes flooding back within seconds now. They're right. The story doesn't make sense. Let's go back there and find him, one of the older guys said. We asked them to stay with us again and get the same result. Once they were gone, someone said that maybe he even followed them and now knew exactly where we are. We all shivered in panic. No one was paying the slightest attention to anyone else anymore. Nobody cried. No one prayed. I remember I only had one thought in my mind. I'd rather kill than get killed in this place. We now wait seated, silent and ready to fight for our lives. We all have our knives out and ready. Minutes passed. Suddenly, we hear people running, approaching. We heard screams of terror. From the sound of it, it's obvious there's more than two people coming after us. I've never been so scared in my life. I hope I could say goodbye to my mum, my dad and sister. My knife's ready to stab whoever comes close. We finally saw our two friends running for their lives, being followed by two men. They came just at the front of the open end of the shelter and stopped. Two men chased them, doing the same thing. We can see their faces. It turned out our camp leaders were really weird and had been following us, almost like they were excited by people crying, being scared for their lives. So they had taken 13 children to the middle of nowhere, to the point they're holding up knives wanting to kill people. It turns out they got in a lot of trouble after it, and I'm sure they got arrested for some of the things that they had done. Now I know nothing come of this, but I'm more scared by how weird the camp leaders actually were, and that the law got involved after, versus a prank they tried to play on us. Growing up in the central US, I've heard all of the myths and legends about skinwalkers. I never really gave them any merit up until last week. I've also heard that talking or thinking about them can draw them in, but I gotta tell someone. Please excuse any formatting errors, and this is my first post I'm on mobile. So let me start with some background. My name's Dakota. I'm 26 and have grown up in and around the Southern Rockies and the Superstition Mountains and all of the vast wilderness that is Colorado, Utah, Arizona and New Mexico. All my life I've been drawn to the outdoors, hiking, climbing, biking, rafting, kayaking. You name it, I've done it. I'm very experienced in all these activities and have worked as a guide and survival instructor since 19. I've experienced many strange, possibly paranormal things due to my time in the wilderness, but I'm rambling. So anyway, last Friday, I took some time off for myself, just to get back in tune with the solitude of nature. I packed all my gear, finished going through my checklist, and made sure to let some of the other guides know where I was heading when I'd be back. Then I loaded my gear into my four-wheeler, made sure my bear, my very sweet and loyal overprotective German Shepherd, was comfy in the passenger seat. He is my lookout, adventure partner and best friend. He never leaves my side, even to the point when I have to use the bathroom. So we set out shortly after 11 AM towards a canyon I'd recently discovered hidden away behind the thick bush and at an apparent rockside. After about 5 hours of driving through the dusty and desolate landscape, the trails continue on between a narrow passage through the mountainous cliffs. When we arrive, I parked the four-wheeler behind a large outcropping of boulders, took the keys, and covered it with a colour. Not that I was worried about theft. I was probably miles away from the nearest human. I covered it to keep the unforgiving sun to prevent any melting damage. After getting the four-wheeler stashed away, I adorned my pack and my sidearm, a large caliber Desert Eagle. There aren't many animals that you can kill out here, but I had the gun for protection. I surveyed the area. There was thick bush and dry foliage all around us with small foot trails. I clear them on the four-wheeler and see a large rock pile in front of us. I skirted around the rocks to the very narrow passage in behind the left side. It's a tight squeeze, and I had to remove my pack just to get through it. Now I had to slide and shuffle like this for about 20 feet, with cold jagged rocks against my chest and loose boulders against my back. The trail narrowed near the end, and I had stuck my chest in and wriggle my way out in a large opening in the rocks, where Bear happily waited for me with his head cocked to the side with confusion. He was confused why I struggled so much and he passed so easily. When I finally freed myself from the narrow rock, my jaw dropped. All around me, the cliff is covered in ancient paintings and carvings, some of which I recognize from some Native American sites used as religious sites. But many of these symbols were new to me. The most notable was a large painting near where the trail continued on. It depicted a large figure whose head and antlers resembled that of a deer, but the body was long and narrow, strangest of all, bipedal. It is at times like these that I wish I'd brought some piece of technology like my iPhone, but I usually leave it at home, bring in only an emergency satellite phone. Intrigued, I left the opening and headed on the trail. I was surprised by the steep downward slope that seemed to the heading down further and further into the earth. And I was even more surprised when the trail ended at the mouth of a large cave. It's actually a cave that I didn't know about. This couldn't get any better. I set down my pack, pulled out my flashlight. It was getting pretty dark, so I figured I'd just check out the opening, then settle for the night. I wandered in a few feet and abruptly stopped when the floor dropped down into a chasm. My flashlight barely penetrated the dark abyss below me. Disappointed that I'd need to return another day with my caving gear and possibly a partner, I headed back towards the mouth of the cave, and Bear, who had strangely stayed put, didn't follow me in. He must be tired, I thought, as I suddenly started to realise my own fatigue after nearly 5 hours of driving and 5 of hiking. I started a small fire with some newspaper logs I packed, in which burned for a surprisingly long time. I heated up some water for some dehydrated omelette. After a not very satisfying meal, I unroll my sleeping bag and get comfortable, with the fire by my side and the distant view of the stars peeking between the distant cliff tops that shelter me from the rest of the world. With that peaceful thought, I dozed off to the sound of the crackling of fire and Bear snoring beside me. I sleepily checked my watch when I was nudged awake. It's almost 3 in the morning. I softly push Bear's head away from me, nudging me so I can go back to sleep. But that's when, in the dim of the fire, I see that his teeth are now bared, his head low beside me in a protective position. He was starting towards the mouth of the cave with a deep growl emanating from his throat. More alert now, I clumsily grabbed my flashlight and unholstered my pistol, my finger ready to switch off the safety. I mentioned to Bear to be quiet, which was a very handy skill that had taken a lot of time to learn. On command, he quieted, but still snarling at the dark hole in the cliff, I illuminate the edge of the drop-off, my gun aimed with the beam, and we listen. For a few minutes, all I heard besides silence was my heartbeat. Then finally, I heard it. I still can't describe it, but I'll try my best. It sounded like the belt of a goat and the yowl of a wild cat coming together to form words that are broken and foreign. Quiet at first, it's now accompanied by a clacking and scraping sound, getting closer and closer. I strain my eyes to the edge in the light of the beam. What I saw next, I'm sure has been burned into my mind's eyes and I'll never forget it. In the light, there's disgusting long rotten fingers. Something is there up over in the cave. The thing first pulled itself. It's now out of the cave. It's about 6 feet tall, with long deer legs, too skinny to support the weight. The body appeared to be semi-human, but a skeleton draped with rotting flesh, with patches of mangled fur and ribs protruding from its chest. The smell was wretched, and I wanted to look away to vomit and run, but I'm paralyzed with fear. I kept staring at the long cold antlers and the warped and twisted body, long arms hanging loosely in front of the claws scraping the ground, but mostly the disturbing contoured mix of human and animal intertwined to make a face so haunting I remember it to this day. And when it locked into my view, its empty rotted sockets met with my eyes. It lets out some horrifying words. "Let me help you," said very slowly. With that, I snapped out of my paralyzed state, switched off the safety, pulling the trigger twice, then 3 times. In an instant, the horrible thing before me flickered and was 2 feet to the right. I fired again and again, as the thing jerks towards me. Now I really don't remember much of what happened next. Bear barking, us sprinting, flashes of gunfire, the jerking and clanking, the evil voice again. "Let me help you." I just remembered the peak of sunlight, the roar of the side-by-side as me and Bear sped through the desert. We woke up in our shack uninjured, but forever scarred by the experience. It kept me awake every night since, and I needed to tell someone, to warn someone, please. If you ever see carvings or anything in a cave, do not enter.
Hey, leader of the cryptic crew here. Alright, you guys were right. The name is too cheesy. Also, I probably wouldn't be the leader. Casey would. She's got a lot of energy. A few lovely people said they'd like to hear more of our adventures. Thanks for your interest. I've decided to compile a bunch of quick incidents that happened since I moved into my dorm. It's been a busy few weeks, so I can't write much. I've got another 5-page essay due Sunday. First, some background onto my dorm building. It's got a notorious reputation as haunted, and I live in the basement. People call the basement the cryptid zone for 2 reasons. The first reason, just because Joe lives at the end of the hall, and there's quite a few people in on that joke. I swear the closer I got to the door with the nameplate Joe on it, the weirder I feel. The other reason is because of the vibes the basement gives off. The first time I showed Tal my room, they nearly stumbled over. The hallway is long, dark, and artificially lit. If you stare down the hall at night, you start to feel dizzy. That's how long it is. The artificial lighting feels absolutely soul draining, and the basement is always freezing. But that's nothing too abnormal. The real spooky thing is the ghost rumours. I have to admit it now. I've always been a skeptic, never really believing in any supernatural stuff. First night I moved in, I couldn't sleep at all. I moved in 3 weeks earlier than everyone else due to a special program at my university. There was only a handful of other kids living in my building. One other person in the basement with me, and she lives on the opposite end of the hall. That first night was terrifying, and I'm not quite sure why. My thoughts raced through my mind. No matter how many blankets I bunched around myself, I was cold, and I kept hearing things. For the first several hours, I convinced myself it was nothing. The creaks and cracks could be explained by the building's weak structure. The walls were paper thin here. But then I heard crying. I jumped out my bed in fear. The first noise was a nose sniffing. Then I heard a hiccup-like sob. They were so quiet, but not like they were muffled by the walls. It was like someone was trying to be quiet. With a trembling hand, I grabbed a knife and a flashlight from my nightstand. Yeah, I have a knife collection. It seemed like a good idea to bring that with me to protect myself in college. I roll out of bed and head towards the empty side of my room. I turn on my flashlight and scan the room. I wanted to leave, because I'm not going to be that stupid white person from the horror movies. Well, I'm not white, but whatever, you get what I'm saying. But I had nowhere to go, and it was 3:30 AM. I walked over to the walls, and pressed my ear against them. Though my hearing does suck, it's not completely gone. I attempted to listen for several minutes, but I didn't hear anything through the extremely thin walls. I didn't have neighbours yet, but my room was empty besides me, so I had to check. It was the only logical move I could make. After a very scary 30 seconds of searching my little dorm room, I admitted defeat and crawled back into bed. The next day, after meeting new people and attempting to make friends before classes officially started, I brought up the ghost rumours to them. They all said they heard the ghost story too. I asked if anyone heard anything weird, and 2 other people in my building, on the 1st and 3rd floor, said they'd heard something crying. A few days later, more weird stuff happened. We were there early for a special program, so we had homework already. One afternoon, I gave up on my stupid work and left it on my desk before leaving. When I got back 3 hours later, the papers were scattered all around my room and all over the floor. I simply joked about this to my friend, saying, "The ghosts must hate this class too." No, nobody else had the key to my room, and I didn't have a roommate yet, no RA, and no cleaning services. One person dismissed my ghost claims by saying it was just the AC moving the paper. My homework being thrown everywhere happens a few times, and sometimes it wasn't just papers, pens, folders, blinders, and even a protein bar once. I haven't known any cold AC units to be able to move protein bars and books. The morning after one of the first nights I stayed over at Casey's room, she told me something that still terrifies me. We were up pretty late, so when I eventually passed out in her arms, I was out. I can be a heavy sleeper at times. We woke to a phone ringing. My mum had tracked my phone, then freaked out when she noticed I wasn't home. Talk about an embarrassing phone call. One that had to happen over FaceTime because we were both hearing impaired. Her ears are much worse than mine. After I'd taken care of the messy parents itch, all Casey said was, "Sorry you got yelled at. She sounds a bit like a helicopter." When she noticed how embarrassed I was, she reassured me with a kiss, then gasped in realization. I asked what was wrong. "Something really weird happened last night, but..." "What? Am I that bad?" I asked jokingly. She shoots me a look that essentially says, "Shut up, idiot." "Just listen for a second. I don't think you'll believe me, but I don't really have anyone else to tell, and well, it did happen to you." When Casey sounds scared, something must be really bad, so I shut up and listened. "Last night, after you fell asleep, you started talking." "Do you talk in your sleep often?" Casey asked, unable to hide her fear in her voice any longer. Unfortunately, I was no help. "No, I never really have. Not to my knowledge at least. And you know how my ex and I used to live together for months? She would have said something." I instantly regretted bringing up my ex with my new girlfriend, but thankfully Casey overlooked it. "Damn," Casey said through gritted teeth. I sat up asking what was wrong. "Okay, well, last night around 3:33, I know because I checked my phone, you started talking in your sleep, but it didn't sound like you." "Casey, what do you mean?" "The accent was different. The voice was deeper. You were saying the weirdest stuff too," Casey tried to explain. "Like what?" I asked. "What did I say?" "You said, 'Where's my bag? I left it on the 3rd floor.' What do you mean you don't know? What hotel is this? Great service." "Seriously, I said that?" I asked, perplexed. I vaguely remembered my dreams from the night before. They had everything to do with Casey, very little to do with a hotel. I told her my dreams had nothing to do with a hotel. "Yeah, you did. A bunch of other weird stuff too. You sounded like you'd been possessed by someone who died in a hotel." Casey's a firm believer in the supernatural, but I shook my head in disbelief. "There's no way. It's not possible." "How else do you explain it?" "We still don't quite know how. The last story I was debating on sharing because it was weird and mildly weird of me to put on the internet, but oh well, here it goes. So 2 days ago, I was exhausted from my early classes, late night studying before. Of course, I went to my dorm room after lunch for a well-deserved nap. Before I passed out, I thought to myself, man, I really should have taken my bra off before getting in bed, but I was too tired to move. I passed out. It was just like that sometimes. When I woke up, my bra was gone, nobody was in the room, and I slept lightly during naps, so I probably would have felt or heard someone. I've never sleepwalked, so I genuinely have no idea what happened to me. So there are those stories that I can think of from the cryptid zone and beyond. Tell me what you think below. Also, I'm thinking about interviewing Joey and posting that next. He's an unusual man, that's for sure. When I asked where he was from when I first met him, he simply said, I'm from around. He paused, realising he sounded too cryptic. Around here. See you all next time, unless a ghost gets me.
My grandfather told me a story once, as we sat around a campfire in his backyard, in the cool night of the Arizona desert. The horizon is clear, each star twinkled in a purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice is raspy and gravelly, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his dark eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. Way back when I was a boy, about your age, I lived outside an Apache reservation with your great-grandfather. He returned from the war, setting about raising cattle. Now, this is on a 100-acre ranch, settled between a mountainside, with dirt good for growing thorn bush and not much else. One night, my mum was sick, and my pa and I took a trip into town, about 50 miles away, straight through a dry desert, over a washed out creek, and some old abandoned farmsteads. A fire sparked and a log crackled, jolting me out of the story. So Pa and I driving in an old Ford pickup truck. I remember this dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights out of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember too, when the engine began to sputter and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. God damn it, Pa said, guiding the Ford to one side of the road as it coasted to a halt. Stay here, son, he says as he steps out into darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and the cool desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool the engine, and that's when I smelt it. A rotten smell. Strange, I thought. Why could I smell sulphur in the desert? My nose also picked up on some weird rotten tomato smell, almost like one of the dead bloated cattle from the heat. You know, where the crows come and pick holes in the side of them. It was foul and I gagged. My skin began to tingle too, and the back of my neck felt itchy. My face is getting hot. The wind had stopped blowing and hung still and heavy, with the stink filling the cab. Pa, I called. Dad. No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt fear in my bones, in my chest. Boy, I tell you, I've never felt anything like it. Not until Vietnam. I lock the door and reach over for my dad's door. I see a shadow bound across the road, through the dim beams of the light, across the partly open doomed hood. My grandfather paused. He spit a fat wad of tobacco off to the side. He looked passively into the darkness. I realised I was holding my breath. So what happened? He sighs, a creature, and shakes his head. You have to understand that there were legends, old legends older than the rocks of these valleys, older still than Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, than the old Injun chiefs and their shams, the Apache, the Hove, and the Cherokee. All of them old tribes and First Peoples, they told tales, old stories about dark Injun magic, a deal made with old spirits, a blood sacrifice to gain power, old power, enough to fight each other and the Spaniards, and later the white men who come for their land. They called them. He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath and plodded forward in his towel. Across the fire and the sky and the desert, the creek, the moon, the sun and old mountains. They call them Skinwalkers, shape changers, old warriors resurrected as skinless men, with muscle, walking on deer legs, with the torso of a man, the head of a coyote, but really messed up, with long and malformed snouts, teeth like a bowie knife, long arms, standing 7 foot, even hunched over. They'd got the old cowboys and white riders. They'd run through bullets and sabers, part the Spanish armor like a potato sack. Wily too, and they could change their voice to match a person you might know. Boy, that's what I saw, a big and fast. I don't know what it was, only for a second. It runs across the road, grey and molted, muscles flexing under its legs, hooves clomping on the road, stringy muscle hunched over shoulders, and it turned, looking right into the cab and into my eyes, and I swear, boy, it grinned at me. I sank into my seat in shock, in fear, shaken. I knew death was near. The air was erratic. I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before the lightning comes and blows a tree. Charged full with power. I yelled for my dad, but no words come out. I was shaken. As my grandfather told his story, he was still here, so I know he lived, but the supernatural always fascinated me. Even now, I feel the force of his words. Now the real power of the Skinwalkers was tricky. They could change their voices, but also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide, so they could take others. Not for long, the legend says, maybe an hour before the soul of the skin they wore would come looking for their mortal shell before going to whatever hell awaited them. Though I think getting skinned alive was hell. A minute passes in what felt like a lifetime. 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened and I jerked my head to left, putting my fist up to fend off an attack. "Son, it's me," my dad said, before climbing into his cab. He grasped the steering wheel, pulling himself awkwardly, jerking into the seat. I cringed into the corner looking at him, looking hard. "Boy, your great-grandfather was a good man, treated me and my ma right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of man in Poland when he freed them in the camps. And now, I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run or die?" Is it him or not? Let's go get the medicine for your ma. As he pulls the truck into gear, pulling into the side of the road. Our trip resumed. I guess it was him after all. I said, but how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom? No, boy. I knew because out the window, out of the corner of my eye, I seen that beast running right next to the car, staring at me with them yellowed eyes, grinned mouth, and I saw it, hunched and angry, running next to us. I just looked straight forward and floored it. Son, he said, don't look at it. That's how I knew, boy.
To be perfectly frank, I hate talking to Greg. My particular line of work was pleasant enough to exempt me from much face-to-face contact with him. Unfortunately, of course, some contact is inevitable. So, Greg sighed, easing his girth into the seat behind him. Why are we having this meeting? I dropped my slender frame into the opposite chair. You called me in to have a meeting, Greg. He blinked, then sighed in disappointment. You have a previously undocumented cryptid last week, which was sent to Shailene Mountain. Why was there an undocumented subject in your area? I tried not to be condescending. Because, well, if we'd known where it was, then it wouldn't have been previously undocumented. All wild subjects has to be undocumented before we can discover them. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and disgust. I realise that finding these subjects can be frightening, Lisa, but that's no excuse to let it affect your work, he sniffed. And if you can't do with this job, I'll find someone who can. Everybody else in your position is at least 5'8" and 160 pounds. My blood began to boil, but I'd learned long ago not to show any emotion in front of Greg. I forced a smile. I can assure you that I wasn't afraid. If you read the reviews from the extraction team, and the medical report from the missing boy who I found, everyone gave me glowing reviews. Greg slowly took off his glasses before leaning forward in his chair. Lisa, I feel you are often a challenge to my authority. I learned to keep my mouth shut in these moments, but I'm sure my face was crimson. Greg sighed. The subject that you picked up last week, all 167.72 kilograms of it, has been residing in the Shailene Mountains Environmental Niche Reptilian Program. It's several hundred acres of Colorado wilderness that's cleverly blockaded from any civilization entry. I nodded. Thank you for explaining that, Greg, but I was the lead consultant in designing this particular ENRP. Greg scowled. We've just got new orders from Washington, he explained gruffly. He tossed a stack of papers across the desk at me. Doibu needs to clean out his ENRP of all undocumented subjects. I stared at him in confusion. Clear out? Where do they go? Greg shrugged. Last week's subject has chromatically desirable object receptors. I think that's a phrase they used. My jaw dropped. People like his eye colour. He stared back in contemplation. When ground into a powder, it's apparently almost 3% less expensive than the leading black food colouring. I nearly leapt out of my chair. You're going to kill him and take his eyes out. Why? Greg sighed deeply. The federal government's official position is that it doesn't exist. What? I spat. Of course it exists. Greg shook his head. The official position is that there's no concrete evidence one way or another. So there cannot be a policy that recognises the existence of the subjects contained within the ENRP at Shailene Mountain. Therefore, Doibu has been instructed to terminate all subjects therein. I closed my eyes and pulled several hairs out. If your emotional condition prevents you from being able to complete your task, Lisa, there are stronger people who are capable. I controlled my breathing. It wasn't easy. I'm absolutely fine, Greg. But you see that the order to dispose of something inherently implies that it exists. He blinked several times. The official position is that they do not exist. I sighed. Yes, Look, never mind. If they don't exist, why not simply release him back into the wild? Why are they going to kill him? Greg gazed at me stoically. They're not going to kill him, he said matter-of-factly. You are. I stared back, slack-jawed. Well, that wraps things up, Lisa. He shot a chip of voice. I stood up to walk away, shell-shocked. You know, they really screwed up the name of our department, he explained, mostly to himself as I walked out the door. I turned back to see him brooding and grave. They call it the Department of the Interior, but it only covers the outside stuff. I had been airlifted to Channle Mountain in a daze. By the time I'd landed though, my resolve had returned. Though Greg had come to us in a helicopter, I knew that he was outranked once we landed on the ground. I'm not killing that cryptid, I explained to the man at the gate. I could tell that he was in charge, because everyone around him seemed to be afraid of him. He looked down at me. Okay, he responded simply. I sputtered, yeah, well, so that's it. Sure, he explained. The only reason you were requested is because they wanted the subject to be euthanized humanely. He turned away from me to stare at the Colorado sky. I felt betrayed at this moment. It would be a lot easier without that concern, the man continued, his hands clasped behind his back. A 7mm Winchester ballistic silver tip to the thigh should cause death via hemorrhage within 24 hours. It's far less risky than the tranquilizer they suggested used before termination. Frankly, there's no telling how vicious this wild beast could get while they're men trying to put themselves at risk. 24 hours to die? That would be torture. You don't have to do that. He's not dangerous, I nearly shrieked. He glanced back. Don't worry, he won't be a threat if everyone remains in the Jeep. Frankly, I'm glad to hear that you'll be staying out of harm's way. I don't think you realise what you'd be getting into with this monster. You better stay with Greg, where it's safe. My world span. I grabbed my head in my hands and walked away from the group. I focused on the crisp alpine air. I took in the 50-mile view of the wilderness. I thought about why I took this job in the first place. Then I returned to the people in charge. I'll do it, I responded meekly. Give me the tranquilizer gun and the rifle. I blinked away a rogue tear that I was determined not to let them see. But I'll need a bag of red gummy bears to do things right. I bounced back and forth as the Jeep drove farther into the wilderness of the Channle Mountain ENRP. The rifle slid from side to side in my lap. Did George love Lenny? Mrs. Neese asked as she walked the rows of my 7th grade class. He shot Lenny in the head. Most people declare themselves unable to do that to a person they loved. She stopped pacing, and for reasons I'll never understand, she looked directly at me. But I'll have to ask most people a very specific question. If choosing not to kill someone is a result of your own discomfort, doesn't that mean you love yourself more than you love anyone else? Here she leaned in towards me and seemed to tune everyone else out. If your definition of love isn't completely sacrificing your own comfort, then how would you define it? My hands were too numb to tremble as I filled the bolt-action rifle with its deadly contents. I loaded the chamber with a decisive snap, then returned it to my lap. I had joined Doibu because I love the unknown parts of the world. Fear is power, but only to a certain few, and extracting fear is nothing different from extracting human potential. But sometimes the task of being human requires us to build impossible hope from nothing more than broken pieces. I am being forced to kill something that I love because I love it. That much of my humanity remains intact. I turned away from the rest of the people in the Jeep, so I didn't have to hide my tears. The vehicle plunged onwards, unabated, into the hidden forest with the futile goal of finding something more monstrous than what was already in it.
When I was 15, my father and I loved to go camping. This is something we did whenever we had the opportunity. There was some really good forest around where we lived, full of life and sounds. Probably the most peaceful part for my dad at least was the sounds of the nature. It annoyed me, but my father loved it. It made a difference from the mechanical sounds of the job where he worked. So on one particular evening, we do some fishing. We're having a great time looking up at all the stars. The sun's just beginning to set, and you can just about see the northern star in the hemisphere. We decide to call it a night. Now while we're walking back to our camping site, my dad continually stops, not saying why. Now normally I just make fun of him, but I can see that he has his hand on his gun. I know something is wrong. I don't want to scare my dad, and act as though I don't notice anything. Every time that we begin walking, we can hear a sound, louder than our own footsteps, that can't be identified as one specific thing. It's hard to describe, but almost like a deep thud, just beyond your range of hearing, but you can still notice it, if that makes sense. So anyway, we continue towards our camp when my dad suddenly shouts out, "Hey, you stop immediately, I have a gun." I ask my dad what's going on. He tells me to be quiet. He says you take one more step and this is your last warning. And with that, gunfire. There's a few moments of silence before my dad grabs my hand and tells me to run. I don't know what's going on and begin crying in fear. What's more strange is we run past our campsite. We run all the way back to where our car is and speed out of there. He tells me to never tell my mum what happened and that he'll explain one day. Now, as you can imagine, this is the most terrifying experience in my life. Eventually my dad did tell me. He said he thought we were being followed by a very large man, but he eventually caught glimpses of something in the moonlight. Now it looks like a person, yes, but upon closer inspection, he can tell that it's definitely not a normal person. He describes it to me as a skinwalker. Now I don't know too much about them, just that they're to be avoided. He said that's when he pulled the trigger. He knows he landed a direct hit on it, or at least within an inch of this creature, and it didn't even move an inch. This is when he made us begin running. So this happened 17 years ago, so please forgive me if the exact details are fuzzy. So it's the summer of 1999. I was spending the vacation with my mother in New Mexico. I was a 12-year-old at the time and had a severe attitude. I made friends easily with a few girls that lived just around the corner from my mum's home. We spent every moment together that summer. We're a group of 4, all of us thinking we were older and smarter than everyone. Nikki, Katie, Julie, and myself were the last generation of home phone lines, playing outside on the trampoline until dark and sleepovers. We would watch VHS tapes, listen to cassette tapes on our Walkman. It was okay to let your children walk around town at night, and we very rarely locked our front door. We had no cell phones or internet. My backyard had a concrete wall around it and a gate. Now behind the wall was desert as far as the eye could see. Just a barren wasteland of dirt, cacti, shrubs and mountains way off in the distance. This town had a major railroad track running straight through it. There was a major street that had a gas station, restaurant and hotels and attractions. We all received the same warnings from our parents. Stay out the desert, stay away from the tracks, and don't walk the main strip at night. Do you think we listened though? Absolutely not. Julie, Nikki, and I spent our days walking through the desert, crossing the tracks down the strip to Katie's home. Sometimes we would just walk around till dusk. Some days, we would go to my home to jump on the trampoline. This particular day, we get to Katie's house prepared to stay the weekend because her parents are out of town. We were gonna have a party. The first few nights, the girls would jump in from a spiral staircase to a giant beanbag. I refused to participate in this, due to my extreme fear of heights. When we got down to the sleepover business, so to say and decide to watch the original Exorcist. You know, the one with Linda Blair? I didn't sleep. The second night, we all told our parents that Katie's mum was going to drive us to the movies. We all got money from the movies, then promptly walked down to the strip to get junk food. Now, I wish I could say that we're aware of the surroundings, but we're not. We were absolutely oblivious of the man who followed us all the way back to the home. I feel that I should mention that Katie's parents are loaded. They have a huge property with numerous buildings, broken down cars that her dad was remodeling. Their house had a large open kitchen and dining and living room. There were no walls and the whole room was lined with windows. There were 2 doors front and back. The day was just as planned. We get our junk food and make it home safely. We made pizza in the oven, and for some reason, one of the girls turns on the news. As we're eating, we hear a story about staying inside because there's a report of a suspicious man walking on the strip. That's it, suspicious man. We laugh and joke about it. Fast forward a couple of hours. I don't remember what happened, but as girls do, someone said something that hurt Julie's feelings and she storms out of the home. I went after her, opened the front door just in time to see her lighting a cigarette. I sat there with her on a bench while she gone on about the other 2. Suddenly, the air grows thick with anxiety. Julie felt it too. I quietly ask her if she feels as though she's being watched. She responds with a little nod, and then we're blinded. Someone's in a car in the driveway. My heart's racing as I stood up, pulling Julie out of the spot she seems to be stuck in. As we turned to run inside, the man made a sound. I can't describe this sound other than a high-pitched squeal that turned into a growl. I was scared beyond all reason, but somehow I'm able to get myself and Julie inside. The moment we're inside, the headlights go off. It's pitch black again. I lock the door and turn off the light. By now, Julie has regained her composure to tell the other 2 what's happened. As I frantically check the back door and turn every light off, I tell them to be quiet and listen by the back door. I heard the car door close. I was praying to every god that he would go away. Then, right by my cheek, the door handle started to turn slowly, now frantically. I crawl away from the door. I now move over to where my friends are. For the next 2 or 3 hours, we sat still, listening to this man bang on every window or door trying to get inside. The phone was located across the room right next to the 2 windows. I finally got up, gathering the courage to run to the phone. I call my mum. I tell her that we're all alone and someone's trying to breach the house. I hung up with her and waited. Julie screamed to the man that we called the cops, and all of a sudden, the banging stops. We sat there listening to him getting in his car. Then, the sound starts again, that turned into a growl. He's gone now. My mum and stepdad then show up, checking out the place. They found tire tracks and cigarette butts in the driveway. Whoever this was had been watching us for a while. The truly scary part is all the scratch marks on the windows and doors. Clearly not possible for a human to make. This is why I know it was a Skinwalker. Needless to say, Katie spent the rest of the weekend at Nikki's house and had a great story for her parents, which of course they didn't believe. Even to this day, I'm certain this was something supernatural, and not a normal person. I just hope they never come back to me